Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classic Cars. It's a book designed for people who own cars from the 1990s and the 2000s. What I'd like to do today is to talk about a very special little electronic module. It's called a voltage booster. Now, voltage boosters are really relatively recent. They used to be available, but they're always fairly expensive. And so what is recent is their availability at that lower cost. So, what is a voltage booster and why would you need to use one? Well, a voltage booster, as its name suggests, takes in an input voltage. It might be the voltage of the car battery when the car's stopped, 12 volts, or if the car is running 13.8 or 14.4 volts, and it boosts it to the load that it's feeding. So for example, the input voltage might be 14 volts and you might set the output voltage to be 16 volts. Each of the voltage boosters I'm going to describe today has got an adjustment where you can set what voltage you want as the output. Now, why would you use such a device? Well, let's take the example of your dash lights. Say your instrument panel lighting, you've always been annoyed that it's so dim. You'd like it to be a bit brighter. Now, you could take the panel apart, you could take out the instruments, you could replace each of the light bulbs with a slightly higher power version, then reinstall everything, and you'd have your outcome. But how long would it have taken you? Some dashboards take hours to pull apart and reassemble. So let's look at doing it in a different way. What if we find the power feed for that instrument lighting and we put a voltage booster in? So we boost the voltage going to those lights by say 2 volts. Now instead of having say 13 volts when the car is running, they'd have 15 volts when the car is running. Incandescent light bulbs react quite quickly to higher voltages. They get brighter quite quickly as the voltage increases. And so by adding a couple of volts to their feed, we would have those brighter lights without having to go through all the work of pulling the dash apart. Let's take another example, a pump. It might be a fuel pump, it might be a windscreen washer pump if you're running something like an intercooler water spray off it. It might even be a water air intercooler pump. And you think, I'd really like to have a little bit more output from the pump, maybe only at times when I need it, but I don't really want to go to the trouble of replacing the whole pump. Well, if we use a more powerful voltage booster, we can increase the voltage going to that pump. And so we can get a higher speed for the pump motor, we can get a greater output from that pump. Well, what's available? What sort of voltage booster is available? The most common is a quite small unit, the one that's shown here. It's got an output of 3 to 4 amps maximum, say 50 watts. You can see it's got 2 heat sinks, one each side of the printed circuit board, but in operation, if you're running it at those sort of currents, it doesn't even get particularly warm. So it's quite a good little unit. I've used them quite often. However, it is limited to 3 to 4 amps, so if you try and drive it harder than that, it will get hot and probably fail. The bigger one, the one that I've got here, is good for 14 or 15 amps, say 200 watts. But you can see it is a much bigger unit. It's also got a fan on the bottom for the heatsink, the quite big heatsink that's there. And so in a car, you need to make sure it's in a ventilated box or in another situation where air can easily pass across the heatsink. And you can see it is quite a large unit, so it's a bit more unwieldy to mount. But the big unit, as I said, 14 or 15 amps output, 200 watts, it is more likely to be able to run that pump or whatever is the higher load that you want to run at a higher voltage. Now, what are the disadvantages? Well, firstly, you can't go bonkers. If you decide you want to run your filament lamps at 20 volts, they'll probably last about 10 minutes. They're not going to last very long at that high voltage. If you increase the voltage only a small amount, most loads won't have any problem, especially if they're intermittent loads. If it's a windscreen washer pump that's not used all the time, it's only run when in fact you want to squirt water over your intercooler or something like that. Things like brake lights, it's easy to brighten also with some of these modules. The brake lights aren't on all the time, of course, and so that the life of the bulbs is still going to be fairly good. Don't turn up the voltage to things that are load regulated, things like a car radio or a car amplifier. They're not designed to be run at higher voltages. It's not going to achieve any benefit and it might in fact cause harm. LEDs that use a dropping resistor, if you turn up the voltage going to them, you'll turn up the current going through the LED and it won't like it, it'll fail much more quickly. So voltage boosters are very good in certain applications, not universally, But where you have one of those applications, they're so easy to fit and so relatively cheap, especially the small unit, that it's certainly something worth keeping in mind. As I say, they didn't used to be available, but now they're quite commonly available at those low prices. The book's called Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classic Cars. It's out now. I cover voltage boosters in it. I cover using voltage boosters as one of the many techniques that I cover in that book, and I recommend it to you. Thank you.